You ever wonder how something so huge, an institution that's been around for 2,000 years with over a billion followers, how does that connect to someone's ordinary day-to-day life? That's the puzzle we're going to try and unpack, how a massive, ancient, global faith becomes a quiet, daily reality. It's a really fascinating question, right? On one hand, you have this mind-boggling global scale, and on the other, this deeply personal, individual experience of faith. How in the world do you bridge that gap? Okay, so this chart gives you a sense of just how big we're talking. Now, you might think of the Catholic Church as being centered in Europe, and historically it was. But today it's a truly global community. And what's really telling is that its biggest population is now in South America. That's a huge sign of how the Church's center of gravity has really shifted. And get this, here's a fantastic little piece of trivia for you. This massive worldwide community is led from the smallest sovereign state on the entire planet. It's a paradox, and it really gets right to the heart of what we're talking about. So, to really get a handle on this global community, we need to zoom in a little bit. Let's see how it all plays out at a national level. We're going to use Australia as our example. So, in Australia, you've got over 5 million Catholics. But here's the part that really shows you the global nature of it all. About 1 million of them were born in other countries. We're talking Italy, the Philippines, Vietnam, Lebanon, you name it. It's a perfect snapshot of how a worldwide community is reflected right there on a local level. So, how does this huge, diverse, global community stay connected? Well, that brings us right to its central leadership, and that means the Pope and his headquarters in Vatican City. Right at the very top of the Church's leadership, you have the Pope. The current Pope, Francis, is actually the 266th Pope in a line that tradition says is unbroken, stretching nearly 2,000 years, all the way back to St. Peter, who was one of Jesus' original apostles. And Pope Francis himself is a great example of the Church's modern global reality. He's a pope of a lot of firsts. He's the first from the Americas, the first from the Southern Hemisphere, and the first ever to choose the name Francis, which he did to honor St. Francis of Assisi's focus on humility and helping the poor. Now, the Pope's home base and the Church's headquarters is Vatican City. Like we said, it's the smallest independent state in the world. It's basically a tiny country right in the middle of Rome, Italy. And this little spot is the spiritual and administrative hub for Catholics everywhere. So, how do they actually pick a new pope? It's pretty amazing, actually. Cardinals from all over the world gather in Rome. They meet in a secret, closed-door session called a conclave to vote. And here's the famous part, right? It's this incredible mix of ancient tradition and public drama. When they finally reach a 2/3 majority, white smoke pours from a chimney, and that's the signal to the whole world that a new pope has been chosen. But of course, the Pope's leadership in the Vatican has to connect all the way down to local communities. So let's zoom in again and look at the structure that makes that connection happen, the structure that most people actually experience firsthand. The whole hierarchy is really designed to connect every single local community back to the center. So you have the Pope at the top, leading the whole church. Then he appoints bishops to look after regional areas, and those bishops then guide the priests who are in charge of the individual local churches or parishes. It's a structure built to keep everything unified, from the Vatican right down to your neighborhood church. And these regional areas have a specific name. They're called dioceses. So sticking with our example, Australia is divided up into 36 of them, and each one has a bishop in charge, who's basically the main link between the Pope and all the local parishes in that area. All right, so we've looked at the structure of people and places, but now let's switch gears a bit and talk about the structure of time and how faith has actually shaped the rhythm of our week. The 7-day week that we all use has these really ancient multicultural roots. It started with Semitic peoples who based it on the cycle of the moon. Then the Greco-Romans came along and named the days after the sun, the moon, and the 5 planets they could see. Later on, Germanic peoples swapped in their own gods, which is literally how we got names like Woden's Day for Wednesday and Thor's Day for Thursday. So the early Christians took this existing weekly structure and gave it their own meaning. Sunday, of course, became the Lord's Day to celebrate the resurrection. But Wednesday and Friday also became really important. Wednesday as a day to remember Judas's betrayal, and Friday as the day to remember Jesus' crucifixion. These became special days for fasting and prayer. And this weekly rhythm brings us all the way down to the most personal level, the daily and weekly rituals that are really the bedrock of faith for millions and millions of people. Let's start with something super recognizable, the Rosary. It involves saying 150 Hail Marys. But have you ever stopped to think, why that exact number? Why 150? Well, it actually goes back to a pretty practical problem way back in the Middle Ages. You had monks and clergy, the educated folks, who would pray all 150 psalms from the Bible as part of their daily routine. But the thing is, most people, the laity, couldn't read, and they definitely couldn't read Latin, so they were kind of left out. So a solution evolved over time. At first, people started substituting the 150 psalms with 150 Our Fathers. Then, that eventually changed to 150 of the simpler Hail Mary's prayer. And then they added meditations on these key moments, or mysteries, from the lives of Jesus and Mary. And that's how the Rosary basically became the Psalms for the people. Now, beyond private prayer, the Church also has this official daily rhythm of prayer. It's called the Liturgy of the Hours. In the morning, you have morning prayer, or lauds, which is all about starting the day with psalms, hymns, and scripture, to sanctify the beginning of the day. And then on the other end of the day, you have evening prayer, or vespers. This tradition actually grew out of this beautiful ritual of blessing lamps as it got dark, a way to mark the end of the day with gratitude and prayer. Together, they create these sort of spiritual bookends for your day. This idea of evolving traditions is really interesting when you look at something like not eating meat on Fridays. For generations, this was a huge part of being Catholic. It was a serious obligation. But today, that rule isn't binding anymore, except during Lent. It's still encouraged as a personal act of penance, though. It's just a perfect example of how traditions can adapt while their original meaning still hangs on. And that brings us full circle. We've gone from a global community of over 1 billion people all the way down to a simple family prayer or a personal choice about what to eat on a Friday. And that leaves us with one last big thought to chew on. How did these small, daily, personal rituals manage to sustain and give meaning to some of the largest and most ancient institutions in all of human history?